morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of Buckingham Palace, as Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell received the most unusual call of her 20-year career. The voice on the other end belonged to Commander James Hartwell, head of the Royal Protection Squad, and his words carried an urgency she had rarely heard from the typically composed officer. "Sarah, we need you here immediately. Something has happened that we've never encountered before, and frankly, we're not sure how to handle it." Sarah had worked closely with the royal security team on several occasions, but never had she heard such concern in Hartwell's voice. As she made her way through London's busy streets, her mind raced with possibilities. What could possibly rattle the most elite security force in the country? Upon arriving at the palace, Sarah was escorted through corridors she had never seen before, deep into the secure areas where only the highest-ranking officials were permitted. The atmosphere was tense, with guards speaking in hushed tones and senior staff moving with purpose through the halls. Commander Hartwell met her in a small briefing room, his face grave. 3 days ago, one of our most trusted guards, Michael Thompson, came to us with information that initially seemed impossible. Thompson has served the royal family for 15 years without a single incident on his record. He's the last person we'd expect to come forward with what some might consider a wild story. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of information?" "Thompson claims he witnessed something during his night shift that has left him deeply shaken. At first, we thought he might be suffering from stress or fatigue, but after investigating his claims, we've discovered evidence that suggests something far more serious is happening within these walls." The commander pulled out a thick file and placed it on the table. Thompson was on duty in the East Wing 3 nights ago, conducting his regular security rounds. It was approximately 2:30 in the morning when he heard voices coming from a room that should have been empty. According to the official schedule, all senior staff had retired for the evening and no meetings were scheduled. Sarah examined the security logs that Hartwell showed her. Everything appeared normal on paper, but she could see the tension in the commander's face as he continued his explanation. Thompson approached the room carefully, following protocol. What he saw through a partially open door has led to the most serious security investigation in recent palace history. He observed several high-ranking staff members engaged in what appeared to be a clandestine meeting. But it wasn't just any meeting, Sarah. They were discussing information that could potentially compromise the safety and security of the royal family. The detective felt a chill run down her spine. In all her years of working with various security agencies, she understood that when the Royal Protection Squad expressed genuine concern, the situation was serious beyond measure. Thompson documented everything he could remember immediately after his shift. Hartwell continued. Names, faces, snippets of conversation, and most importantly, references to dates and events that haven't been made public yet. We've spent the last 3 days verifying his account, and what we've found is troubling. Sarah studied the photographs and notes in the file. Thompson's handwriting was neat and precise, detailing not just what he had seen, but also his emotional state and the exact timeline of events. This level of detail suggested someone who understood the gravity of what they had witnessed. The individuals Thompson identified include people who have access to the most sensitive information regarding royal family movements, security protocols, and private schedules. If his observations are accurate, we're looking at a potential breach that goes far beyond anything we've dealt with before. The commander's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with visible concern. "Thompson has agreed to meet with you personally. He's been staying in a secure location since coming forward, partly for his own protection and partly because we needed time to verify his story. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know." Sarah waited, sensing that the most crucial information was yet to come. "In the past 48 hours, we've noticed unusual activity around Thompson's personal life. His phone has received calls from unknown numbers. His apartment building's security cameras captured unfamiliar individuals loitering near his residence, and his sister reported being approached by someone claiming to be conducting a survey about palace employees." The implications were clear and alarming. If Thompson's account was accurate, and if unknown parties were already aware of his involvement, the situation had escalated beyond a simple internal security matter. "We believe Thompson stumbled upon something that certain individuals are very keen to keep secret," Hartwell said. The question now is whether we can protect him long enough to understand the full scope of what he discovered, and more importantly, whether we can prevent whatever plan he may have uncovered from being carried out. Sarah closed the file and looked directly at the commander. "When can I meet with Thompson?" "He's waiting for us now," Hartwell replied. "But I must warn you, Sarah, what Thompson witnessed and what our preliminary investigation has uncovered suggests that the threat may be coming from within our own trusted circle. We're not just dealing with an external security threat. We're potentially looking at betrayal from people who have sworn to protect the royal family with their lives." As they prepared to leave the briefing room, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the gravity of the situation. Throughout her career, she had investigated countless cases involving deception, betrayal, and criminal activity. But never had she encountered a case where the stakes were so high and the potential consequences so far-reaching. The palace corridors seemed different now, filled with shadows and possibilities she hadn't considered before. Every staff member they passed, every guard they encountered could potentially be involved in whatever conspiracy Thompson had uncovered. The very institution that represented stability and tradition in British society might be harboring secrets that could shake its foundation. As they walked toward their meeting with Thompson, Sarah realized that the next few hours would likely determine not just the outcome of this investigation, but possibly the future security of one of the world's most protected families. The warning Thompson had issued was just the beginning of what promised to be the most challenging case of her career. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell's first impression of Michael Thompson was that of a man carrying an enormous burden. The safe house where they met was a nondescript apartment in central London, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Thompson sat rigidly in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together, and his eyes darting occasionally toward the curtained windows despite the presence of armed protection officers outside. "Detective Mitchell," Thompson began, his voice steady but strained, "I need you to understand that coming forward with this information may have cost me everything. My career, my reputation, possibly even my safety. But I took an oath to protect the royal family, and I believe that oath means more than protecting my own interests." Sarah settled into her chair across from him, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands. This was clearly a man who had not slept well in several days. "Tell me exactly what you saw, Michael. Start from the beginning and don't leave out any detail, no matter how small it might seem." Thompson took a deep breath and began his account. "I was conducting my regular security sweep of the East Wing. It was 2:27 a.m. according to my log when I first heard the voices. The sound was coming from Conference Room B, which according to our duty roster should have been completely empty. All official meetings had concluded hours earlier, and the cleaning staff had finished their work by midnight." He paused, his eyes focusing on something beyond the room as he recalled the events. "I followed standard protocol and approached quietly. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual because those rooms are always secured after use. As I got closer, I could make out at least 4 distinct voices, all speaking in hushed but urgent tones." Sarah made notes as Thompson continued. "The first voice I recognized immediately. It belonged to David Chambers, Deputy Private Secretary to Her Majesty. He's been with the palace for over 12 years and has access to nearly all royal scheduling and travel information. The second voice was Helena Morrison, Senior Communications Officer. She handles press releases and public statements regarding royal activities." Thompson's account became more detailed as he warmed to his story. "I positioned myself where I could see into the room through the gap in the door. There were 5 people total, including 2 I didn't immediately recognize. But the conversation I overheard was what truly alarmed me." "What specifically were they discussing?" Sarah prompted. "They were talking about upcoming royal engagements that haven't been announced publicly yet. But more than that, they were discussing ways to, and I quote, create opportunities for more significant access. Chambers mentioned specific dates and locations where the royal family would be vulnerable to what he called uncontrolled variables." The detective felt her pulse quicken. "Did they mention any specific plans or intentions?" Thompson nodded grimly. Morrison was taking notes. Throughout the conversation, She mentioned something about coordinating with external contacts and ensuring that the timeline remains flexible, pending confirmation from overseas partners. Detective, I've worked royal security long enough to know that legitimate palace business doesn't sound like that. He stood up and walked to the window, careful to remain behind the curtains. But here's what really convinced me that something sinister was happening. One of the unidentified individuals, a woman with a slight accent I couldn't place, mentioned that the target's routine has been established and the window of opportunity is narrowing. She specifically referenced the royal family's upcoming trip to Scotland, which at that point hadn't even been finalized, let alone announced. Sarah looked up from her notes. How could you be certain it was the Scotland trip she was referring to? Because she mentioned Balmoral by name, and she knew details about the planned activities that only someone with the highest level of access would know. She talked about a specific morning when the family traditionally takes a walk through the grounds without full security escort. That information is closely guarded and shared only among the most trusted senior staff. The implications of Thompson's account were staggering. Sarah had worked enough security cases to understand that this level of detailed intelligence suggested either an incredibly sophisticated external operation or, more troubling, extensive internal collaboration. Michael, did you manage to identify the other individuals in the room? Thompson returned to his seat and pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. I made sketches as soon as my shift ended. The woman with the accent appeared to be in her 40s, professionally dressed with short dark hair and glasses. She carried herself with authority and seemed to be leading much of the discussion. The other unidentified person was a man, older, perhaps in his 60s, with gray hair and a beard. He spoke less but seemed to be taking detailed notes of everything that was said. Sarah examined Thompson's sketches, which were surprisingly detailed for someone with no artistic training. These are quite good. Have you shown these to Commander Hartwell? Yes, and that's where things became even more concerning, Thompson replied. The commander ran the descriptions through our security database and discovered that individuals matching these descriptions were spotted on palace grounds during 2 previous occasions when there were unexplained lapses in our security protocols. The detective raised her eyebrows. What kind of lapses? 3 months ago, there was a 20-minute period when cameras in the West Wing malfunctioned simultaneously. 6 weeks ago, an electronic lock on a restricted area failed during a time when it should have been impossible for anyone to access that system remotely. Both incidents were attributed to technical failures, but in light of what I witnessed, Commander Hartwell is having both situations reinvestigated. Thompson's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it nervously. Detective, there's something else you need to know. Since I came forward with this information, I've been receiving strange calls. The caller never speaks, but I can hear background noise that sounds like office equipment or computers. My sister has also reported being followed when she leaves work. Sarah made additional notes and looked up at Thompson with concern. Have you recognized any of the voices or sounds during these calls? No, but yesterday something happened that made me realize how serious this situation has become. I received a text message from an unknown number that contained specific details about my daily routine, including the time I typically have breakfast and the route I take when I visit my mother. The message ended with the words, "Some conversations are better forgotten." The threat was clear and direct. Sarah understood that Thompson was no longer just a witness to suspicious activity. He had become a target himself. The people involved in the conspiracy he had uncovered were clearly aware of his knowledge and were taking steps to either silence him or intimidate him into keeping quiet. Michael, I need to ask you something important, Sarah said, leaning forward. In all your years of service with the Royal Protection Unit, have you ever had any reason to doubt the loyalty or integrity of any of your colleagues? Thompson considered the question carefully before answering. Detective, until 3 nights ago, I would have said absolutely not. The people I work with have dedicated their lives to protecting the royal family. But what I witnessed in that room has forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about palace security. If David Chambers and Helena Morrison are involved in something that could endanger the royal family, then I have to wonder who else might be compromised. As the interview continued, Sarah began to understand the true scope of the challenge they faced. This wasn't simply a matter of investigating suspicious activity. They were potentially looking at a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of palace administration and possibly extended far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace itself. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell returned to New Scotland Yard with Thompson's testimony. She immediately contacted her superior, Chief Inspector Robert Hayes, who had 25 years of experience handling sensitive cases involving national security. Hayes listened to Sarah's preliminary report with growing concern, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his understanding of the serious implications. "Sarah, what you're describing sounds like a potential threat to the Crown itself," Hayes said, closing the file she had presented. "We need to expand this investigation immediately, but we also need to proceed with extreme caution. If there truly is a conspiracy involving palace insiders, we can't risk alerting the wrong people to our investigation." Within hours, Sarah found herself leading a joint task force that included representatives from MI5, the Royal Protection Squad, and select members of the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Unit. The team was small by design, consisting only of individuals with the highest security clearances and proven track records of absolute discretion. The first major breakthrough came when technical specialists analyzed the security footage from the night Thompson witnessed the clandestine meeting. While the cameras in Conference Room B had mysteriously malfunctioned, surrounding corridors had captured partial images of individuals entering and leaving the area during the time frame Thompson specified. Agent Jennifer Walsh from MI5 presented the enhanced images to the task force. "We've identified 3 of the 5 individuals Thompson described. David Chambers and Helena Morrison as expected, but also this woman," she said, pointing to a partially obscured figure in the hallway. "Her name is Katerina Volkov, and she has a very interesting background." Sarah studied the photograph intently. The image quality was poor, but it matched Thompson's description of the woman with the slight accent who had seemed to be leading the discussion. "Volkov is a former intelligence operative who supposedly retired from active service 3 years ago," Walsh continued. "She has connections to several international organizations that specialize in what they euphemistically call political consulting. Her presence at Buckingham Palace, especially during an unauthorized meeting, raises immediate red flags." The revelation that a former foreign intelligence operative had been inside the palace sent shockwaves through the task force. Commander Hartwell, who had remained silent during most of the briefing, finally spoke up. "How is it possible that someone with Volkov's background gained access to our most secure areas? Our screening procedures are supposed to prevent exactly this type of infiltration." Agent Walsh consulted her notes before responding. "That's where the investigation becomes even more troubling. Our preliminary research suggests that Volkov didn't gain access through normal channels. Someone with significant authority within the palace administration would have had to provide her with the necessary credentials and clearances." Sarah felt pieces of a complex puzzle beginning to fall into place. "You're suggesting that the conspiracy Thompson uncovered isn't just about gathering intelligence. Someone on the inside is actively facilitating access for external operatives." "Exactly," Walsh confirmed. "And based on the conversation Thompson overheard, this isn't a recent development. The level of detailed knowledge about royal schedules and security procedures suggests this operation has been ongoing for months, possibly longer." The task force spent the next several days conducting discreet surveillance of the individuals Thompson had identified. They discovered that both Chambers and Morrison had recently made significant changes to their personal routines, including opening new bank accounts, purchasing expensive items with cash, and making frequent phone calls to numbers that couldn't be traced through normal channels. More disturbing was the discovery that both palace insiders had been accessing computer files and databases well beyond their normal areas of responsibility. Computer forensics specialists found that Chambers had downloaded detailed floor plans of royal residences, while Morrison had accessed classified communications regarding the royal family's security arrangements for upcoming public appearances. The investigation reached a critical point when surveillance teams observed Chambers meeting with an unknown individual in a remote location outside London. The meeting lasted only 15 minutes, but photographs captured the exchange of what appeared to be documents or files. "We need to move carefully here," Chief Inspector Hayes warned during an emergency task force meeting. "If we act too quickly, we risk losing the opportunity to understand the full scope of this conspiracy. But if we wait too long, we might allow whatever they're planning to be carried out." Sarah had been wrestling with the same dilemma. What if we approach this from a different angle? Instead of focusing solely on surveillance, what if we try to anticipate their next move based on what Thompson overheard? Agent Walsh nodded thoughtfully. The Scotland trip to Balmoral. If they were discussing specific vulnerabilities related to that visit, perhaps we can use that knowledge to our advantage. Commander Hartwell consulted his calendar and looked up with visible concern. The Scotland trip is scheduled to begin in just 8 days. If they're planning something during that visit, we're running out of time to prevent it. The task force developed a two-pronged strategy. They would continue monitoring the suspected conspirators while simultaneously implementing additional security measures for the Scotland trip that wouldn't be obvious to potential threats. Sarah was assigned to work directly with Thompson to identify any additional details he might remember about the overheard conversation. During their follow-up interview, Thompson revealed a crucial piece of information he had initially forgotten. "Detective, I just remembered something else from that night." The older man with the beard mentioned something about the package being delivered through established channels. At the time, I thought he might be referring to official documents or communications, but now I'm wondering if he meant something more sinister. Sarah felt her blood run cold. In the context of a potential threat to the royal family, references to packages and delivery systems took on an entirely different and more ominous meaning. "Michael, think carefully. Did he mention any specific timing or location for this delivery?" Thompson closed his eyes and concentrated. "He said something about the morning routine on the third day. If they were talking about the Scotland trip, that would correspond to a time when the family traditionally takes a private walk through the Balmoral grounds." The implications were staggering. Sarah immediately contacted the task force with this new information, and within hours, bomb disposal experts and additional security personnel were being discreetly positioned around Balmoral Castle. But even as security measures intensified, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. The conspiracy Thompson had uncovered appeared to be far more sophisticated and far-reaching than anyone had initially imagined. And with each passing day, the pressure mounted to identify and neutralize the threat before it could be carried out. As she reviewed the growing file of evidence, Sarah realized that what had begun as a simple security incident had evolved into one of the most serious threats to the crown in modern British history. The warning Thompson had issued was proving to be just the tip of an iceberg that threatened to shake the very foundations of the monarchy itself. The breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected source. While Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell and her team continued their investigation into the Palace conspiracy, a separate incident at Heathrow Airport triggered alerts that would ultimately connect to Thompson's warning in ways no one could have anticipated. Customs officers conducting routine inspections had detained a diplomatic courier carrying materials that raised immediate suspicions. The courier, traveling under diplomatic immunity, was carrying what appeared to be ordinary documents, but scanning equipment detected unusual chemical signatures that prompted further investigation. Agent Jennifer Walsh from MI5 was called to the airport when initial analysis suggested the materials might be related to explosive devices. What she discovered sent shockwaves through the intelligence community and provided the missing link the task force had been searching for. The documents were treated with a chemical compound that becomes highly volatile when exposed to specific radio frequencies. Walsh explained to the emergency task force meeting convened at a secure location near Westminster. "This isn't some amateur operation we're dealing with. This represents a level of sophistication that suggests state-level resources and expertise." Sarah studied the technical reports with growing alarm. "Are you saying that these documents could be turned into weapons?" "Not exactly weapons in the traditional sense," Walsh replied, "but when activated, they would create a significant explosion with the potential to cause serious injury or death to anyone in close proximity." The courier was carrying 12 such documents, each individually prepared and coded with different activation frequencies. Commander Hartwell leaned forward in his chair. "Do we have any evidence connecting this courier to the individuals Thompson identified?" Walsh nodded and produced a series of photographs. Airport security cameras captured the courier meeting with someone who matches the description of the older man Thompson saw in the conference room. The meeting lasted only minutes, but it was clearly planned and orchestrated. The pieces of the conspiracy were finally beginning to form a complete picture. The clandestine meeting Thompson had witnessed wasn't just about gathering intelligence or planning access to royal facilities. It was about coordinating the delivery and placement of sophisticated explosive devices that could be remotely activated during royal appearances. The timing of the courier's arrival corresponds exactly with the discussions about the Scotland trip, Sarah observed. If they're planning to use these devices during the royal family's visit to Balmoral, we need to act immediately. But the investigation took another shocking turn when forensic analysis of the activation frequencies revealed that the devices were designed to be triggered by signals that could be transmitted through the palace's own communication systems. Someone with access to the royal family's security communications could potentially activate the devices remotely. Chief Inspector Hayes coordinated with technical specialists to trace the origin of the frequency codes. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about the scope of the conspiracy. The activation codes are embedded in the palace's emergency communication protocols, the lead technician explained. Someone with administrative access to the security systems has programmed these frequencies into the backup communication channels. This means the devices could be activated from within the palace itself, and the activation signal would appear to be legitimate emergency communications. Sarah felt the magnitude of the betrayal settling over her like a cold weight. How many people have the level of access necessary to make those kinds of modifications to the security systems? Fewer than a dozen, Commander Hartwell replied grimly, and unfortunately both David Chambers and Helena Morrison are on that list. The task force faced a critical decision. With the Scotland trip just days away, they needed to determine whether to cancel the royal visit entirely or attempt to neutralize the threat while allowing the trip to proceed. Canceling would alert the conspirators that their plan had been discovered, potentially driving them underground and making future detection impossible. But allowing the trip to continue carried enormous risks. Agent Walsh presented intelligence that helped clarify their options. Our surveillance teams have identified additional members of this conspiracy. The network extends beyond the palace and includes individuals with connections to several international criminal organizations. If we move too quickly, we risk losing the opportunity to dismantle the entire operation. Sarah proposed a strategy that would require incredible precision and coordination. What if we allow the trip to proceed, but we secretly replace all of the key personnel who have access to the activation systems? We could use undercover operatives to monitor communications and ensure that any activation attempts are immediately detected and countered. The plan was audacious and risky, but it offered the best chance of both protecting the royal family and gathering evidence to prosecute all members of the conspiracy. Over the next 48 hours, the task force worked around the clock to implement the most complex security operation in modern British history. Undercover agents were positioned throughout Balmoral Castle, disguised as everything from maintenance staff to catering personnel. Electronic surveillance equipment monitored every communication channel, and bomb disposal experts conducted exhaustive searches of the grounds and buildings. Meanwhile, Thompson continued to provide crucial assistance by helping investigators understand the normal patterns of palace operations and identifying any unusual activities or personnel. His knowledge of security procedures and his familiarity with legitimate palace staff proved invaluable in distinguishing between normal operations and potential threats. "Detective Mitchell," Thompson said during one of their planning sessions, "I need you to understand something. These people who are involved in this conspiracy, they're not outsiders who somehow gained access. They're people I've worked alongside. For years, people I trusted with my life and the lives of the royal family. The betrayal runs deeper than just violating professional obligations. They've betrayed everything we swore to protect." Sarah could see the personal toll the investigation was taking on Thompson. His entire professional world had been turned upside down, and he was struggling to reconcile his faith in the institution he served with the reality of corruption within its ranks. "Michael, your courage in coming forward has potentially saved lives," she assured him. "Without your warning, this conspiracy might have succeeded. Whatever happens in the next few days, you should know that your actions have made all the difference." As the royal family prepared to depart for Scotland, Sarah coordinated final security arrangements with a team of specialists who represented the best of British law enforcement and intelligence services. The operation they were about to undertake would test every aspect of their training and expertise. The Scotland trip would proceed as scheduled, but beneath the surface of royal tradition and ceremonial routine, one of the most sophisticated counter-terrorism operations in British history was about to unfold. The warning Thompson had issued was about to be put to the ultimate test, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Sarah spent the night before the royal departure reviewing every detail of their plan, knowing that the slightest oversight could result in catastrophic consequences. The conspiracy they were facing represented a level of betrayal and sophistication that challenged the very foundations of royal security, but she was determined to ensure that Thompson's warning would not be in vain. The royal family's arrival at Balmoral Castle proceeded with all the traditional ceremony and pageantry that the public expected. But beneath the surface, Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell coordinated the most intensive security operation in the castle's history. Every smile, every wave, every seemingly casual interaction was being monitored by dozens of undercover operatives positioned throughout the grounds. Sarah had established her command center in a concealed location within the castle, where banks of monitors displayed feeds from nearly 200 hidden cameras and listening devices. Agent Jennifer Walsh from MI5 sat beside her, monitoring electronic communications that could potentially trigger the explosive devices they knew were hidden somewhere on the property. "All units report normal activity," came the voice of Commander Hartwell through Sarah's earpiece. "The family has settled into their private quarters and the evening schedule is proceeding as planned." But Sarah knew that according to Thompson's intelligence, the real danger would come on the third day of the visit, during the traditional morning walk that would take the royal family through the more remote areas of the Balmoral grounds. Her team had spent days searching every inch of the proposed route, but the sophisticated nature of the explosive devices made detection extremely difficult. The first 2 days of the visit passed without incident, though surveillance teams continued to monitor suspicious communications and track the movements of known conspirators. David Chambers and Helena Morrison were both present at Balmoral, fulfilling their normal duties while remaining under constant but discreet observation. On the morning of the third day, Sarah felt her pulse quicken as the royal family prepared for their traditional walk. The route would take them through wooded areas and along pathways that, despite exhaustive searches, could still potentially conceal threats. Bomb disposal experts had worked through the night conducting final sweeps, but Sarah knew that their opponents had demonstrated a level of sophistication that made conventional detection methods unreliable. "Overwatch Team Alpha, report status," Sarah spoke into her radio as the royal party emerged from the castle. "All clear from elevated positions," came the immediate response. "No unusual activity detected." The family began their walk at precisely 9:30 a.m., following the same route they had taken for years. Sarah tracked their progress on GPS monitors, while simultaneously watching for any unusual electronic activity that might indicate an attempt to activate the hidden devices. 20 minutes into the walk, Agent Walsh detected the first sign of trouble. "Sarah, I'm picking up unusual radio traffic on one of the backup communication channels. Someone is attempting to access the emergency frequency protocols." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. "All units, we have potential activation. Attempt in progress. Maintain positions but prepare for immediate response." Through her headset, she could hear the calm voices of the undercover agents positioned along the walking route, each confirming their readiness to respond to any threat. The royal family continued their walk, unaware of the drama unfolding around them, while Sarah and her team prepared for what could be the culmination of months of planning by the conspirators. "I've isolated the source of the transmission," Walsh reported. "It's coming from within the castle itself, specifically from the communications room where Helena Morrison is currently on duty." Sarah felt her heart race as she realized the conspiracy was about to be activated. "Commander Hartwell, we need to secure Morrison immediately, but we can't alert other potential conspirators to our operation." The next few minutes required precision timing that left no room for error. While undercover agents moved to intercept Morrison without causing alarm, other team members prepared to jam any activation signals that might be transmitted to the explosive devices. "Target secured," came Hartwell's voice over the radio. Morrison was in the process of entering activation codes when we apprehended her. She had a list of specific frequencies and timing sequences. But Sarah's relief was short-lived. Through her monitors, she could see David Chambers moving toward a different communication station on the opposite side of the castle. The conspiracy had built-in redundancies, and Morrison's capture had not neutralized the threat. "All units, we have a secondary activation attempt in progress. Chambers is accessing alternative communication equipment." The royal family was now at the most vulnerable point of their walk, in a wooded area where evacuation would be difficult and where several of the suspicious documents had been detected during earlier searches. Sarah made the critical decision that would define the success or failure of the entire operation. "Emergency evacuation protocol," she commanded. "Move the family to secure positions immediately." The precision with which the security team executed the evacuation was remarkable. Within seconds, what appeared to be casual conversation among the royal party transformed into a coordinated movement toward predetermined safe locations. The family, trained to respond to security alerts without panic, followed their protection officers with calm efficiency. Meanwhile, technical specialists succeeded in jamming the communication frequencies that Chambers was attempting to use, but not before partial activation signals had been transmitted. Sarah watched her monitors with growing concern as electronic signatures indicated that at least some of the explosive devices had received activation commands. "Bomb disposal teams, we have possible live devices along the walking route," Sarah announced over the radio. "Evacuate all personnel from the target area immediately." The next 20 minutes tested every aspect of the operation's planning and coordination. While the royal family was safely secured in the castle's most protected areas, disposal teams worked to locate and neutralize devices that could detonate at any moment. The technical nature of the explosives made the work extremely dangerous, as the devices could potentially be activated by radio signals from sources the team couldn't control. "First device located and secured," reported the bomb disposal team leader. "Chemical analysis confirms it matches the samples from Heathrow. This device was definitely prepared for remote activation." Over the course of the afternoon, 5 more devices were located and neutralized. Each discovery confirmed the sophistication of the conspiracy and the level of planning that had gone into the attempted attack. The devices had been positioned with expert knowledge of the royal family's habits and routines, and their activation would have resulted in casualties that could have changed British history. As evening approached, Sarah coordinated the arrests of the remaining conspirators. In addition to Chambers and Morrison, 6 other individuals with connections to the palace were taken into custody. The international aspects of the conspiracy were being pursued by MI5 and other intelligence agencies, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Thompson, who had remained in protective custody throughout the operation, was finally able to see the results of his courageous decision to come forward. "Detective Mitchell," he said when Sarah briefed him on the day's events, "I still can't believe that people I worked alongside for years were willing to endanger the lives of the family. We all swore to protect." Sarah understood Thompson's struggle to reconcile the betrayal with his faith in the institution he served. "Michael, what you witnessed that night and your decision to report it prevented what could have been a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The conspiracy was real, the threat was genuine, and your warning made all the difference. The operation at Balmoral had succeeded, but Sarah knew that the full scope of the conspiracy was still being unraveled. The investigation would continue for months as authorities worked to understand how such a sophisticated plot had been developed and to ensure that no similar threats remained hidden within the security apparatus that protected Britain's most important institutions. The royal family's Scotland visit continued for the remainder of the planned duration, but under drastically enhanced security measures that remained largely invisible to the public. Sarah coordinated debriefing sessions with all members of the operation, ensuring that every detail of the conspiracy's methods and execution was thoroughly documented for future security planning. The evidence collected during the operation revealed the true scope of what Thompson had uncovered. The conspiracy had been in development for over 18 months, with international connections that extended to criminal organizations in 3 different countries. The level of planning and resource allocation suggested that the attack on the royal family was intended to be just the beginning of a larger campaign of destabilization. Sarah spent her final day at Balmoral reviewing the timeline of events and ensuring that all evidence was properly secured for prosecution. The successful operation had prevented a potential catastrophe, but it had also revealed vulnerabilities in royal security that would require extensive review and reform. 6 months after the events at Balmoral Castle, Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell sat in a quiet courtroom in London as the final verdicts were delivered in what had become known as the Royal Protection Conspiracy case. The trial had captured international attention, not only for its sensational nature but for the unprecedented breach of trust it represented within one of the world's most secure institutions. David Chambers received a sentence of 25 years for treason, conspiracy, to commit murder, and terrorism-related offenses. Helena Morrison was sentenced to 22 years on similar charges. Both had eventually provided detailed testimony about their recruitment and the international network that had orchestrated the plot, though their cooperation did little to reduce the severity of their sentences given the magnitude of their betrayal. The international aspects of the case continued to unfold long after the immediate threat had been neutralized. Katerina Volkov, the former intelligence operative who had been present at the clandestine meeting Thompson witnessed, was eventually apprehended in Eastern Europe through a joint operation involving multiple intelligence agencies. Her arrest led to the discovery of similar plots being developed against other high-profile targets across Europe. Sarah had spent much of the intervening months working with international law enforcement to trace the financial networks that had supported the conspiracy. The investigation revealed that the plot against the royal family was part of a larger campaign designed to destabilize democratic institutions across multiple countries. The sophistication of the operation and the resources involved suggested state-level sponsorship, though definitive proof of which state actors might have been involved remained classified. Thompson had gradually returned to a modified version of his duties within the Royal Protection Squad, though his role had evolved significantly. His experience and insights into security vulnerabilities had made him invaluable in developing new protocols and training programs designed to prevent similar breaches in the future. The trauma of discovering betrayal among his closest colleagues had been significant, but his commitment to protecting the royal family had only strengthened. Detective Mitchell, Thompson said during one of their final official meetings, "I often wonder what would have happened if I had decided not to report what I saw that night. The thought that I might have walked away and allowed this plot to succeed still keeps me awake sometimes." Sarah had come to deeply respect Thompson's courage and integrity throughout their months of working together. "Michael, you made the right decision under incredibly difficult circumstances. Your warning didn't just prevent a potential tragedy, it exposed a network of corruption that could have continued to operate undetected for years. The reforms implemented within the royal protection system as a result of the investigation were extensive and far-reaching. New background check procedures, enhanced psychological evaluations, and improved monitoring systems were all implemented to prevent future infiltration. The communication systems that had been exploited to nearly activate the explosive devices were completely redesigned with multiple layers of encryption and verification. Commander Hartwell, who had overseen much of the security reform process, reflected on the lessons learned from the conspiracy. "This case forced us to confront the reality that our greatest vulnerabilities don't always come from external threats. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who have gained our complete trust and who understand our systems well enough to exploit them." Sarah had been promoted to Detective Chief Inspector in recognition of her leadership during the investigation, and she had been asked to head a new joint task force focused on protecting critical national institutions from internal threats. The experience of unraveling the royal protection conspiracy had taught her that traditional security models needed to evolve to address the sophisticated nature of modern threats. The public had learned only limited details about the conspiracy, with most information remaining classified to protect ongoing investigations and security procedures. Official statements described a successful counterterrorism operation that had prevented a serious threat to the royal family, but the full extent of the betrayal and the international connections remained secret. For Sarah, the case represented both a professional triumph and a sobering reminder of how quickly trust could be weaponized by those with malicious intent. The conspiracy had succeeded in penetrating the highest levels of royal security, not through sophisticated technology or external pressure, but through the simple exploitation of human trust and institutional loyalty. The royal family had been briefed on the general nature of the threat they had faced, though many specific details remained classified. Their response had demonstrated the remarkable composure and professionalism that had characterized the monarchy through centuries of challenges, both public and private. The traditional Scotland visits continued, though with security arrangements that reflected the lessons learned from Thompson's warning. Agent Jennifer Walsh from MI5 continued to coordinate with international partners to monitor and investigate similar threats against other democratic institutions. The network that had targeted the royal family had tentacles that extended far beyond Britain, and dismantling the entire operation would likely take years of continued investigation and cooperation. What Thompson witnessed that night was just one meeting in a much larger campaign, Walsh explained during a final briefing with Sarah's team. We prevented this specific attack, but the organizations behind it continue to operate and develop new strategies. Constant vigilance isn't just a motto, it's an absolute necessity. As Sarah reflected on the months of investigation and the dramatic events at Balmoral, she was struck by how a single moment of conscience had changed the course of history. Thompson's decision to report what he had seen, despite the personal and professional risks involved, had prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on one of Britain's most important institutions. The case files from the Royal Protection Conspiracy investigation filled several cabinets in secure storage facilities, representing thousands of hours of work by dozens of investigators and specialists. But at the heart of all that documentation was a simple truth. Sometimes the most important victories against sophisticated threats come not from advanced technology or complex strategies, but from individuals who have the courage to do the right thing when it matters most. Thompson's warning had indeed led to consequences that few could have imagined. What began as a routine security patrol had uncovered an international conspiracy, prevented a potential tragedy, and ultimately strengthened the very institution the conspirators had sought to destroy. The guard who issued the warning had proven that individual integrity and courage could still make all the difference in an age of complex global threats. Years later, when Sarah looked back on the case that had defined much of her career, she remained convinced that Thompson's decision to come forward represented the best of human nature triumphing over betrayal and corruption. His warning had saved lives, exposed enemies, and demonstrated that even the most sophisticated conspiracies could be defeated by ordinary people who refused to remain silent when they witnessed wrong.